Welcome back to the Amnesia Experiment. Today, Jerry will be reading a little from Chapter 5 and from Chapter 6, where Laura will join him at HB's for dinner, where they're all in for a big surprise. Here's Jerry.
David spent the day at a table in the hotel cafe, making lists of potential producers and deciding whom he would most like to get for photography. That was always a critical component, but he would be especially so in the movie he intended to make. He also thought about what parts of the book to include. Much of it would have to be done in flashbacks, or better yet, a lot of background could be accomplished through a film at the historical center. Perhaps a school teaching aid, not for the younger grades though. It would be too graphic. He filled a notebook with names and ideas. As long as he kept tipping, the cokes kept coming, and he was left alone. By 3 o'clock, his brain was slowing down. He decided to check out the pool and take a swim. He arrived at HB's doorstep an hour before the appointed time. A glass elevator whisked him to their floor. Joanna opened the door and stood surveying him. Her hand cupped his jaw while she checked out each profile. Yes, it really is neglectful, David Spaulding. Wipe your feet, dear. They both laughed at the old admonition and hugged enthusiastically. Then it was David's turn to inspect. He held her at arm's length and approved of the cream-colored linen slacks and celery green blouse that perfectly set off her pale gold shoulder-length hair and hazel eyes. Good thing I didn't tell Laura to expect someone matronly. You look terrific. You better save your charm for Laura. From what HB tells me, you're going to need them. She sure keeps me off balance. I usually have a pretty good feel for people, but she isn't easy to read. Come into the kitchen with me. HB is in the study finishing up something or other. He said to send you in, but I think I'll keep you to myself for a while. I've got the grill going. I thought we'd do salmon. That seems safe enough. So talk to me. How is Amy? What does she think about this new project? She must be relieved you're out of your funk. David watched Joanna expertly peel a section of grapefruit. He knew he couldn't avoid answering, but he was thankful he didn't have to look her in the eye. Actually, Amy doesn't know about it. She's in Washington. State, that is. Planting trees. I haven't called her yet. I thought maybe I should get Laura on board first. Joanna sighed and dumped the grapefruit onto the mixed greens and finished it with toasted walnuts. You need to call her regardless of how this turns out, or you're planning to sink into despair if this author doesn't give you a contract. She didn't wait for an answer because they knew it wasn't really a question. She kissed him on the cheek and turned the conversation to her work at the foundation to support high-risk kids. HB walked in and put his arm around her. That's my girl. She'd save the world if she could. HB kissed the top of her head and turned to David. Speaking of saving the world, where is this mysterious author of yours? On her way, I hope. She preferred to come alone. I don't know if she didn't want me to know where she lives or what. Anyway, it was a concession on her part to come at all, so I just gave her your address. I'm anxious to see what you think of her. I have a feeling I might need your help in figuring out a way to persuade her to let me do the film. That doesn't sound like the David I know who can talk a man out of his last dollar and have the man be grateful that he did. David shook his head. Not this time. He told them about Laura's comment about your Earth and the weird feeling that gave him. How could she be so smart and so disassociated from reality? Ah, so now you're the psychiatrist. What makes you think? The doorbell rang and David gave a guilty start. I guess I should get the door. Nonsense, said Joanna. You two go up, put the salmon on the grill. I'll bring her up. Joanna didn't know what she expected when she opened the door, but it certainly wasn't the attractive young woman that stood before her. When Joanna realized she was gawking, she opened the door further. Do come in, dear, and forgive me for staring. David neglected to tell me you were so beautiful. Are you a model? I'm Joanna, by the way. Before Laura could answer, she was ushered into a surprisingly airy room. Arched windows covered the south wall. No curtains obstructed the city view. The oak floors and light cream walls were a neutral palette for the soft watercolors that dominated the walls. The blues and greens in the furniture seemed a reflection of the artwork. It was simple and elegant, but felt comfortable and inviting. What a beautiful room. Laura turned back to her, who smiled and took her arm. We like it. Come on through to the kitchen. The boys are up on the patio. You can help me carry the drinks. Laura followed her into a kitchen designed for a serious cook. Joanna handed her 2 glasses and led her onto a garden rooftop. Our small nod to the environment and our oasis in the city. How lovely, Laura saw David and a taller, bald-headed man standing by the grill but paying no attention to what was cooking. Oh, you too, Joanna said. Go talk to our guest while I tend to this. HB laughed and said to David, she despairs of my doing anything domestic. Secretly, I think she's glad. Laura saw David coming toward her and had a moment of panic. He seemed not to notice and introduced her to HB. Laura felt the warm, firm grip and looked into the warmest, most compelling brown eyes she'd ever seen. She was drawn to him, but he terrified her. Here was someone who could learn her deepest secrets. Here was danger. She involuntarily moved closer to David. Welcome to our rooftop getaway. Joanna and I were so happy to find a place we could have our own dash of green space. We hired the grunt work, but Joanna supervised. Please have a seat. If Joanna needs help, she won't be bashful about asking for it. He smiled at the absurd thought of his wife being bashful. Laura sank into a chair and looked around the garden, unable to identify the potted plants and trees. This is lovely. What is that white flower with such a nice fragrance? That would be a gardenia, a particular favorite of Joanna's. HB was surprised that Laura didn't recognize a gardenia, but let the observation pass. Very nice. It must take a lot of her time to keep up with this. Not really. We have someone that helps with the garden and the house cleaning. Joanna mostly keeps busy with the foundation she runs. It provides funds and oversight for several community programs that have after-school activities and mentoring programs for area youth. She's quite passionate about it. So far, David had contributed little to the conversation. Laura felt his unspoken need and wondered how she would handle it when he actually broached the subject of the book. She took a sip of her drink, afraid it might contain alcohol, but reluctant to offend her host. She was relieved to find it was a mixture of fruit juices and seltzer. She didn't especially like seltzer, but it was just a preference, not an allergic reaction like she had to alcohol. She felt their eyes on her and wished she were better at small talk. She could carry on for hours about philosophy, religion, or political policy, and was searching for some comment that would lead away from personal when HB broke the silence. So, tell me, Laura, what prompted you to write your book? Are you an environmentalist like David here? Laura looked at David, hoping he would comment. What she saw was a keen curiosity in her response. I suppose in a way I am, but I'm not an activist, more like an armchair alarmist. The people of Earth have no idea what the storms, the acid rain, the insects, the droughts, and the floods will be like. So many people will die. It's a terrible thing to go through. You will need domed cities to keep you safe. To do this, you must take action in the next couple of years. Laura noticed Joanna standing beside her and the men gripping the arms of the chairs. Everyone was staring at her. She wondered what she'd said that alarmed them so. She couldn't remember, and that frightened her more than the reaction. It was Joanna who broke the spell. Perhaps we should save our discussion until after dinner. I prefer cheerful talk at the table. Take a seat anywhere, you two. HB, will you help me bring the salad and rolls up? They both disappeared down the stairs. David took Laura's arm and led her to the table. I don't see how anyone who feels so strongly about the environment could refuse to make a movie that might change a few minds, get some people off dead center. Laura looked across the table at David and smiled. You're persistent, aren't you? Do you really think you can make a difference? No, I don't. think I can. I think we can. At least I think we should try. Laura shivered. Though the night was warm, his words began to fill up inside her. They bounced around, building pressure. It was a mistake to have come. There was danger here. She really should get back to her boat. The voices from her dreams began their sing-song cacophony. They were insisting she do something, but she didn't know what. They were swimming around David's words, too loud, too much pressure. She had to leave. She rose to apologize to David, to say she was sorry she couldn't stay, yet with all those words bouncing around inside her head, none of them would come out. David saw her stand and noticed her distress. He came to her side just as she fainted. David caught her and was struggling to get her to chair when HB and Joanna appeared. They set the food down and rushed over to help her into a chaise lounge. I don't know what happened. Is she all right? It isn't serious, is it? We were just talking. Then she stood up, looked like she was going to say something, and fainted in my arms. I'll get smelling salts, Joanna said, and disappeared down the stairs. HB felt Laura's pulse. It was racing. Laura, listen to my voice. I'm sure you can hear me. Listen to me. Everything is going to be okay. You can take a few minutes to rest. Then I want you to wake up. Laura could hear a new voice now. It sounded soothing, but it was the voice of one she feared. She told it to stay away. She wanted to go home. Now. What HB and David heard was a beautiful and eerily distressed voice talking to them in a language they had never heard. They looked at one another in astonishment. Joanna arrived and held the salts beneath Laura's nose. Laura gasped and sat up. She woke with a start. Strangers were staring down at her. Their faces registered concern and something else. Surprise, wariness, doubt, something. I'm afraid you fainted, my dear. This came from a woman whose voice was kind but strong. Next to her was a man with eyes that made her shiver. He could get inside her, discover her secrets. The young man behind her needed something. She sensed his pain. I'm sorry, Laura, David said. I didn't mean to pressure you about your book. Her book, that was what this was about. The world shifted back into focus. She remembered their names, where she was. She sat up and said, It's not your fault. David, I've had a lot of pressure on me lately. Not enough sleep. I guess it all caught up with me. I'm sorry and embarrassed. I'm afraid I've ruined your lovely dinner. Not at all, Joanna said. Salmon is good, hot or cold. Do you feel like eating? Yes, I'm actually hungry. Wonderful, Joanna said, and spread her hands toward the table. Shall we? Laura dutifully tasted the salmon and was pleasantly surprised by the delicate seasoning. This is wonderful, she said, and began to eat with such enthusiasm. Everyone relaxed and followed her example. Joanna kept the conversation light. She had quite a store of amusing stories plucked from exploits of children her foundation supported. Everyone steered clear of the topic of her book and possible movie rights. When Joanna excused herself to get them coffee, Laura rose too. I really must be going. I promised to go into work this evening as soon as I could. Chris had something special going and asked if I could be there before 9 to take her place. They all rose to walk her to the door. Please no, I'll just go down with Joanna and see myself out. David will talk again. Thank you, HB and Joanna, for such a lovely dinner and being so kind about my fainting. After Laura left, the silence on the rooftop was eerie. Both men seemed to be holding their breath until Joanna hollered up the stairs. Okay, you two, she's gone. You can gossip now. Just don't say anything important until I join you. The men let out a collective sigh. Wow, what was that? Exclaimed HB. That's what I was hoping you could tell me. Was that acting or was it real? And what does it mean? I'm no linguist, but I bet my reputation that what she was speaking is no language, no known language, and all the body signs indicated genuine stress. I suppose a gifted actor could fake that, but she isn't a professional actor, is she? Not that I know of. She's a writer and a waitress. I guess if she could create that kind of book she could create a new language. Yes, she could. People living in their own world often do, but I've never seen anyone slip in and out of a private world so quickly. When she is anchored in the here and now, she is charming and confident. Even coming here to dinner, which I assume she really didn't want to do, she appeared to be very self-assured. There is something very powerful about her presence. Let's assume she was faking the whole thing, David. Somehow I feel a lot more comfortable with that idea. In fact, it's the only thing that makes sense to me. But why would she do it? Why all the drama? Maybe to throw you off track, HB said. Keep you from pressuring her for a decision. That makes sense. But then why tell me we would talk later? I thought that was genuine. Yes, I think she meant it, HB said. However, I tend to think everyone that happened was genuine. I would love to get her on my couch and find out what is really going on. I don't know how we could do that, David said. If I could just get her to agree to sell me the rights, I wouldn't have to deal with her again. Joanna set mugs of coffee down for each of them. So, you would use her and just throw her away, David? It does sound rather crass, doesn't it? But I really don't know how to deal with her. And if I can get the book rights, there really is no need for further involvement. Unless she attaches a lot of conditions to the agreement, that would suck. Joanna said, For what it's worth, I seem to have an entirely different opinion of our mysterious guest. HB and David looked surprised. Joanna was no pushover. They both valued and trusted her instincts and were curious to hear her take on the situation. Ah, I have your attention at last. Joanna allowed herself the smallest smile. I like her. She's quite bright. Did you know she lives on a boat? She docks in a private cove? Well, that would take a bit of cash, you say. She's a waitress, HB asked. David nodded. She didn't get her money from the book sales. The editor said they covered costs and they each made a little, but not much. I sure wouldn't pay for a boat or a private dock. She must have an inheritance, Joanna suggested. I don't feel the feeling she married well and divorced. Even better. She is beautiful, but seems innocent somehow. Maybe I should call and offer to take her shopping. She clearly doesn't spend money on clothes. David and HB smiled at this, turning the conversation. HB said, I can think of nothing more useful to say about Laura. Why don't you give me a quick rundown on what her book is about? Something environmental, I know, but there must be more to it than to get you so excited about putting it into film. They spent the rest of the evening talking about the film's potential and reminiscing.
Thank you, Jerry, for reading from the Amnesia Experiment. This will be the last that we will read from this book, because to go any further, it would spoil the plot for anybody that wants to read the entire book, and I hope you will want to do that. You can find this and other books of mine on my website at lorrainesiegel.com. Just click here on the link or go to amazon.com and write in Lorraine Siegel in the search bar.